Welcome back to the Writer's Hive, where we are demystifying the writing process and creating a writer's hive mind based on our experiences. My name is Caitlin Duncan, and I have with me every time Julie and Amber. Today we are talking about a topic that we had a comment from on a previous video. So thank you, Krista, for your comment. So today we are discussing how to craft a beginning of our novel. And to kick it off here, how about Amber? We start with you.
Sure, I can start. So I am not sure how to give advice on this just because I feel like I always know my beginning fairly well. It's the middle that I struggle with. So I feel it's funny that everybody has their different struggles, but I feel like when I start to think about a book that I'm going to write and how to open it, how to begin it, I kind of think about the genre that I'm writing and other books by other authors that I enjoy and kind of see how they open their books. And not just like to copy it, but to say like, what drew me in the first 50 pages of this book? Like what part of it? Was it the characters? Was it the action? And just kind of think about how that would fit your story and try to pull that in. So if you really enjoyed, I really like this banter in that way. And besides, beginnings can always change. You can always change it. Once you get to the end, if it doesn't work, go back and you can change it. So
yeah,
don't stress too hard.
Yeah. Definitely changing it after writing through. I know that when I end a book, the beginning always changes. Maybe not necessarily the first scene, but we'll go on to that in a minute. How about you, Julie?
I think kind of similarly, in one of my master classes, and forgive me because I don't remember the instructor, they mentioned that not only do they take their whole book through like multiple rounds of writing and drafting, but they also rework their beginning quite frequently. So I like to start all of my chapters on like a hook. You know, they tell you to have a hook, have something that draws the reader in from the beginning. And I do try to do that, not just with my first chapter, but with all of my chapters. But one of the things that they said that stuck with me was that normally when you start to write a beginning, you'll realize later in editing that you can get rid of like the first 3 or 4 paragraphs and jump right into the heart of it, that you start to like set the scene a little bit too much and you can jump right into the action. And I found that applies not just to the first chapter, but to almost all chapters, where you can really start it a lot stronger, grip the reader from the beginning of the first chapter so that they can't stop, so that each chapter becomes that page turner, that cliffhanger. And so I like to try to craft, whether it's witty banter, whether it's a scene setting, whether it's leaving off at the end of the prior chapter in a way that makes the reader continue. I think that deciding where your book starts usually changes. I don't know very many people that write it and then it stays that way. It really does become what's the best introduction to this world and to this story. And for me, that's always character influence, just because I tend to write more character influenced stories. So I usually start with something pretty pivotal for my character.
I like that. Because I'm such a big outliner, at least the past few books, I know I specifically did it with my contemporary fantasy series because I knew it was a series up front. I sort of use this method. It's from Save the Cat. So in Save the Cat Beats, there's that final image at the end of a book. And for some reason, when books come to me, I usually know about where they end. So I usually take that image and I try to put it at the beginning of the book when I can, because I know if I don't have a good beginning right away, even if I know it's changing, I'll be able to really start with the book. So I do look at that final image and I try to change it in some way to show where the character would start the book or start the journey. And I envision just a way to change that up in the very beginning and then sort of go throughout the book and then make sure it ends there. And I think at any point in the process where the ending looked a little different, I would go back and change the beginning. But I have to say, for the past few books that I have really focused in on this, I really haven't changed much at the beginning, other than, maybe not necessarily the exact beginning, but I'll change in between, like usually the chapters after the beginning. So I try to have that up front when I can.
That's a great point. In terms of Save the Cat, I love that. And especially for this comment, because they mentioned that they have a very strong idea of where they want the book to end. So in terms of Save the Cat and just kind of like defining what they mean by a mirror image or a closing image, at least in terms of Save the Cat, they want it to be something that reflects the opposite. So at the end, they either have or don't have whatever they had or didn't have at the beginning. So if your character is alone and sad, if it's a romance and they're alone and they're sad and they're they're feeling like a disconnect, or they feel like they're kind of floating without a tether. At the end, you're going to see the opposite of that. So if you know exactly how it's going to end and you have a very clear image of where your character's growth is going to take them, think of the place that creates the most intrigue and a room to explore and character growth for the beginning, I think is a great place to start. If you're having problems starting a book or crafting like how things begin and you know where it ends, kind of what makes the most dynamic story as a starting point for that ending point is a good place to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, because books do take a little longer to read and sort of study, like because Save the Cat is basically the blueprint for a lot of movies, you could always take a look at your favorite movie and see exactly where it starts and ends. And you will really see that in a lot of popular movies. You will see that mirror image, and whether or not it's the same location. So for that series that I was talking about, the contemporary fantasy, I actually took the beginning scene from the first book and I made it the last scene in the very last book, because the last book was sort of a prologue. So I sort of looked at it almost the same exact scene. So I thought that was a little fun way to do that. And you can play with that. You can play with that as well. So it doesn't have to be the same exact scene. It could be a feeling or the tone, or even it could be the same setting with a different character. Play around with it a little bit, especially because you know where your book wants to go. That's very important, and it's good that you know where it wants to go, and then just starting at the beginning just may take a little work in learning your process.
I think just to stress not to stress about it too much, because it doesn't have to be set in stone before you start writing. It can change as you write.
I agree. And I think that's a lot of, advice out there when, especially the people who talk about outlining, you have to have everything up front. Well, if that helps you start your book, absolutely. But I know I have written a lot of books, and when I get to the end, I always have to do some tweaking in the beginning. Because I'm an outliner, that doesn't mean that I always know what I'm doing throughout the process. So just be gentle on yourself and learn when you can, and just know that maybe the beginning sounds really good when you start, but by the end of the book you want to change it. It'll make the book better, and when you're not too rigid about the process and kind of coming down on yourself a little bit if you don't have it perfect from the first page.
And I would hazard a guess that most writers, for them, the most changed part of their book is probably going to be the opening. Like that's just most likely going to be your most fluid part of the book. So start. I think the important part is just to start. So if you know where you want to go, begin. One of the things that I love to do is to go through my favorite books and look at the opening line or an opening paragraph and see how writers that I admire or books that really moved me, how did they start? Because by the end of the book, it's a favorite book, but do you really remember that opening line or how it really began? So go back, take a look at it, see at the end, when you have all your feels about the book, how did they begin versus how do you feel at the end? Is there an emotion you're trying to create between beginning and end? But some opening lines are just stunning. Other ones are really quiet, and it can set a tone for a book, but I think that that's something that comes in editing. So in terms of a drafting process, just get into it. In terms of an editing process, I think one of the most important things to kind of focus on is that first beginning. But in terms of drafting, just begin and then you can hone.
Yeah, I think that if you're struggling with writing because you can't figure out your opening, skip it. So like, let's say your book is about a drive, or what are they called? Road trips. Say your book is about a road trip and you don't really know how to set it up that they're going to go on this road trip. Well, skip that and just start with them getting in the car and starting the road trip. And then once you learn about the characters throughout the book, you can then know, oh, okay, this is how they would have set this up. So then you can go back and write it later. If it's keeping you from writing, just skip it and go forward. And most of the time, like Julie said, you won't even need those first chapters. Starting in the middle of that action could actually end up being the best thing for your book anyway. So just give it a shot if it's holding you back.
Yeah, that's great, Amber. That triggered something for me, because I do have a video here on my channel about reverse outlining, and that's something that I usually do when I get stuck. I went to a workshop, and all we talked about was reverse outlining, and we actually reverse outlined an entire book in that workshop. So basically we took the end piece, which it seems, from this comment that Krista has the end, but she needs to know where to start in the beginning. So starting at that end point, or even the midpoint, or somewhere that that's like early on in the story, and bring yourself back. So say they're at a diner. Well, how did they get there? What was the purpose of going to the diner? And just keep going back until you get to that beginning part you really like and you really think is good for the story. It starts off the story really well. So that could be another tool that you could use for creating a beginning.
Hopefully that was some advice that resonated with you, that works for you.
Yeah, and do let us know in the comments if you have any other questions about crafting beginnings, or you're having trouble. We'd be happy to chat with you further in the comments. And again, thank you, Julie and Amber, for joining me today. And if you enjoyed this video, do give it a like. Hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell next to it so you know the next time I upload, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.